Okay. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة الله تعالى على رسوله الكريم وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. Okay, so we are going to go back now to our Maliki Fiqh class. So last week we had talked about Sitrat al-Awra, about the covering of the Awra, and if you missed that class, inshallah, it's up on the YouTube. You can check that out. For this week, inshallah, we are now going to be looking at actually two things. Um, so the first part that we're going to look at today, and we're gonna do things inshallah a little bit out of order, but just because a couple people had asked me about it. So the first part we're going to do today is about faslun fi istiqbal al-Qiblah. We're going to talk about facing the Qiblah. What are the things related to the necessity to face the direction of prayer, facing the Kaaba for Salah. So we're going to talk about istiqbal al-Qiblah. But then the second thing we're actually going to go to, even though it's a little bit out of order in terms of the book by al-Majjājī, hafidhahullah, is that we're going to go into discussing the Sahw or sajda to Sahw, which is making the prostration for through some type of either omission or addition for forgetfulness in the prayer, inshallah. So we're going to do that as the second part. So the first part here about istiqbal al-Qiblah, al-Majjājī, hafidhahullah, may Allah preserve him, said, استقبال القبلة في الصلاة شرط لصحتها مع الأمن حضرا وسفرا. Actually, I always have a typo, so I need to add just that little bit, safaran. So as it relates to the question of facing the Qibla, that it is a condition and a necessity for the validity of performing the prayer. So when a person goes to make the Salah, it is a condition for the validity and the acceptedness of the prayer, whether that person says hadran safaran, whether you are a person that is a resident or traveling. So either way, you have to face it. في غير التطوع للراكب المسافر. Right. However, it is not a requirement when a person is on a, we'll start with the concept of a riding animal, but we'll get in a little bit to how that will be expanded, right, into, say, like being on a boat or an airplane, right? But it says, what, لِلرَّاقِبْ al-musafir. However, if you're performing prayers that are not mandatory and you're on a riding animal, then facing the Qibla is not a necessity. Now, I wanted to, in the previous slide, you can see it says what? That it is a shartun li-sihhatiha ma'a al-amin, that it is a condition for the validity of it. And so I wanted to go a little bit into, well, what is this here, al-amin? What do we mean here by the validity? So he says, وَكَذَا al-qudra. It can also be thought of like by validity, meaning of the ability to do so. He says, فَالْخَائِفْ. So a person that is praying but is fearful, a person that is under duress and they need to do their prayer, but they're fearful because of their situation. يُصَلِّيهَا بِحَسْبِ الْإِمْكَانِ كَالْعَاجِزِ. So that person, they pray according to their capacity to do so, just like a person that might have a disability that would prevent them from doing the prayer in the normal way. And of course, this is all related to what? Istiqbal al-Qibla, the facing of the Qibla. So under normal circumstances, it's a requirement. But if a person is fearful or, their life is threatened, or, I mean, just imagine, unfortunately, like our brothers and sisters in Gaza, Um, the performing of the prayer in that and بشكل خائف, right, in the situation of a person that is fearful, then you do the best that you can. ودليل اشتراط الاستقبال القبلة في الصلاة قوله تعالى فول وجهك شطر المسجد الحرام. So he said the evidence for the requirement of facing the Qibla is found in the Quran in Surah Al-Baqarah, where Allah says what? And therefore turn your face in the direction, the shatar, turn your face in the direction, shatar al-masjid al-haram. وَحَيْثُمَا كُنْتُمْ فَوَلُّوا وُجُوهَكُمْ شَطْرَهُ. And wherever you are, turn your faces in that direction. He says, وَكَذَلِكَ الْعَمْلُ النَّبَوِي الْمُسْتَمَرُّ إِلَّا فِي التَّطَوُّعِ فِي السَّفَرِ. So this is a requirement also supported by the repeated or the continuous practice of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, except in إِلَّا فِي التَّطَوُّعِ فِي السَّفَرِ, except as we mentioned before, doing voluntary prayers while a person is traveling. إذا كان راكبا كما ذكرت في الأصل, and as we mentioned in the original text. He says, ولي حديث أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه, likewise evidence is also found in a statement of the Prophet ﷺ according to the Sahabi Abu Huraira, في المسيء في صلاته, concerning the person who, and this hadith is transmitted in the context of a person was doing their prayer and they made some mistakes and they didn't do it correctly. And so he says, أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال له, and so the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم then said to this person that didn't perform the prayer correctly, إذا قمت إلى الصلاة فأسبغ الوضوء ثم استقبال القبلة ثم كبر. So the Prophet ﷺ said, when you stand for prayer, then complete your wudu, right? Make a wudu, then face in the direction of the Qibla, and then you start your prayer by saying Allahu Akbar, make takbir. And he says, وَأَخْرَجَهُ Muslim بِهَذَا اللَّفْظ. And so the particular wording of this hadith can be found in Imam Muslim in his collection of hadith, rahimahullah. Now, as it continues, وَلَا يُشْتَرَطُ تَحِرِّ عَيْنَ الْكَعْبَةِ إِلَّا لِمَنْ يَرَاهُ مِنْ أَهْلِ الْمَسْجِدِ الْحَرَامِ. So this will be one important thing about some difference between the school of Medina, the so-called Mālikī Madhab, and some others, is the granular need to be super precise about facing the Qibla. And so one difference between the Malikis and a few other schools of thought is that in the school of Imam Malik, there's not this kind of granular obsession of being absolutely, in the direction of the Qibla, down to darajat, like to, little degrees, but rather the interpretation of the word shatar, right, in the فَوَلُّ وُجُوهَكُمْ شَطْرَ الْمَسْجِدِ الْحَرَامِ. So the word the Quran uses is shatar, which means a general direction. The only exception is that unless you are actually in the haram. If you are in the haram, then yes, you must precisely face the Qibla. But otherwise, it's acceptable just to merely be in the general direction of the Kaaba. And I say this because, nowadays, alhamdulillah, we have all this technology. And we have cell phones with apps on them and, other things. And I've seen people, have two different Qibla finder apps. And one person is, this, and another then this, and then they start to argue. And it's like, look, okay, perhaps you follow a school that is that micro obsessed with it. The Maliki school, and again, not to be sloppy, but generally it's sufficient to face in the shatar, in the general direction that is Masjid al-Haram, right, to the Kaaba. He says, إلا أن يكون الانحراف عن سمتها كثيرا, right? Unless you are deviating significantly from that, and then also you're doing so فَتَبْطُلُ الصَّلَاةَ بِتَعَمُّدٍ ذَلِكَ. And then, of course, if you're doing it intentionally. So like you generally know in this direction is the Qiblah and you're just going to go in this direction because you just don't care, then no, then in that case, your salah would be considered invalid, your prayer would be considered invalid. وَيَجْتَهِدُ الْمُصَلِّ إِذَا كَانَ فِي الصَّحْرَاءِ. And so when a person is in the middle of the desert, they should strive to find the correct direction. By here, they don't mean the granular sense, but strive to find the overall shatar, the general correct direction. Why? Because in the desert, perhaps it can become difficult to have a sense of direction. So if you happen to find yourself in the desert, try to make an extra effort to make sure that you are praying in the right direction. في فرض جهة القبلة فإذا غلب على ظنه جهة صلى إليها. So if the person becomes reasonably certain about the direction of the prayer, then they pray in that direction. فإذا تحير تخير. فإذا تحير تخير. And then if he becomes unsure, then you have to make a choice. So if you're in a situation where it's not really clear, then you have to make your best choice and do so. And so وإذا كان في مصر من الأمصار الإسلامية المشهورة كالمدينة والدمشق والقاهرة قلد مراحب مساجدها العتيقة. So then likewise, if you're visiting like a Muslim country, and he gives the example, say like Medina, Damascus, Cairo, wherever. If you're in a Muslim country that have established masajid and they have their manawara, their so-called minarets, and they have the marahib, the maharib, right? You have the mihrab, right? The little niche where you pray in the direct. Then you can trust those and pray in those directions. Meaning you shouldn't go somewhere like, well, I got out my little pocket calculator and my app, and I don't know. I think you guys are off by 0.7 degrees. No, if you go there and that's the established, even though they were established in older times, al-Atiqa, even though they were established in older times, it's acceptable to still use those, and you shouldn't allow this to be something to create an issue. وقبلة الراكب لدبة أو سفينة وما أشبههما كقبلة من يباشر الأرض في صلاته إلا المتطوع في سفره فله أن يصلي صوب الجهة التي يسير إليها مركوبه. So he says, what the direction, like when a person is praying and you happen to be on a riding beast, or let's say you're on a ship, or you're on something, you might be on a ship, or like in our case, you might be on an airplane and the like. Then when you're standing for the prayer, but the prayer is one of the mandatory prayers, every effort has to be made to pray in the shatar, in the general direction that you know to be Masjid al-Haram. However, if they're doing some voluntary prayers, again, you can just pray in the direction that either your riding mount or the ship or the airplane is going in. As long as those are voluntary prayers, then you can pray in the direction of it. If it's one of the fara'id prayers, one of the mandatory prayers, every effort has to be made to be in, again, the general direction of Masjid al-Haram. So as I said, the other part that I'm going to go in today is a Sahw. A Sahw, which I know is an important one, dealing with what happens when you have either an omission or an addition in the prayer. So several of you had asked about this one. So فصل في السهو قد وقع السهو بالنقص في ركن من الأركان. So for one, Sahw, as it relates to some deficiency in the prayer, we have to then ascertain, is that from one of the pillars of the salah? So you'll have to go back and review, but we'll give you some examples, right? But you go back to the previous lessons where we described what are the arkan of salah. If you forget from amongst those, then you know what is it that's going to happen. So he says, what rukn min al-arkan aw fadila min al-fada'il. This also includes if you happen to leave out a fadila, a meritorious act of the prayer, aw sunnatin min as-sunan, or even a sunnah act of the prayer. وقد يكون بزيادة في شيء في الصلاة. Likewise, Sahw can also be performed, right? The two prostrations of Sahw, they can also be performed when something is added to the prayer. So we can either deal with omission or addition, and then we have to determine whether or not the thing that was omitted to, or omitted from, or added to, was from a pillar, a rukn of the prayer, a fadila, a meritorious act of the prayer, or a sunnah of the prayer. He says, فَإِذَا سَهَا, right, and I went into a little bit of saha means to forget or to omit. So it's from the verb saha. It means to omit or forget. So فَإِذَا سَهَا عَنْ رُكْن, if a person happens to omit a pillar of their prayer, or add to, but omit, لم تجزئه صلاته حتى يأتي به. So if you omit a pillar of the prayer, then the prayer is not valid until it is rectified. So let's say you didn't read al-Fatiha, or you didn't make takbir of ihram. Well, I don't know, you're tired and you just start with al-Fatiha, alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen, but you didn't say Allahu Akbar first. That cannot be, the prayer will not be valid until that is rectified. فَإِذَا سَهَا عَنْ فَضِيلَةٍ مِنَ الْفَضَائِلِ. But if you do something from the meritorious acts, and he gives an example, كَالْقُنُوتِ وَالتَّسْبِيحِ وَالتَّمْحِيدِ لم يلزمه شيء. This is important, that there's no need to have to make that up. فإذا سجد لذلك بطلت صلاته. In fact, let's say you had the intention to make qunut. Commonly, people associate making the dua of qunut with, say, Fajr prayer. But you can actually make the dua of qunut for other prayers as well. Well, let's just say you're going to make dua of qunut, and for whatever reason, you forgot to do it. Though you had the intention to do it, but because the qunut is a fadila and not a necessity, it's just a very meritorious act to do. If at the end of your prayer, like, oh man, I forgot to make qunut, I should make sajda of sahw. I should make these two prostrations to make up for it. If you do that for any fadila of the salah, when you forgot to do it, then actually that in itself invalidates your prayer. This is important. Sometimes people they learn about the Sahw only about the arkan, like, oh, I left this mandatory part out, which of course is important, but then they don't learn that actually you can invalidate your prayer by doing Sahw for something that it doesn't require. Right? And so that's either the qunut or tasbih, right? Some type of subhan, right? Proclaiming, or al-tamheed, right? لم يلزمه شيء فإذا سجد لذلك بطلت صلاته. Now, السنن التي يسجد لتركها حرصا سبعة. Now, the specific acts of sunnah in the prayer for which the prostration is required are 7, meaning if you omit them, then, and these are sunnah acts, that still you can do the sahw. So, al-awwal, what is qira'a surah ba'd al-Fatiha. So, for instance, you're praying Salat al-Maghrib, Allahu Akbar. You start reciting Surah al-Fatiha. And whatever reason, and this will probably, I think in most people, this will more commonly occur in perhaps the second raka'ah than the first. So let's say you pray Maghrib, Takbir, Allahu Akbar, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. So, okay, you pray the first raka'ah as normal. You recite al-Fatiha, and then you recite some other surah, and then you complete your raka'ah, and then you stand back up and you start your second raka'ah, and you recite al-Fatiha, and then you forget, and you just recite Fatiha, and you go into ruku'. But then you're like, oh man, I forgot to recite some Quran after Fatiha in my second raka'ah. Then this is one of the 7 that you can make sajda to sahw. Al-Jahar, let's say, right, reciting out loud, because there are 2 prayers, Salat al-Dhuhr and Salat al-Asr, right? These 2 prayers have to be recited silently. And so if you recite Salat al-Dhuhr, if you do Salat al-Dhuhr or a significant part of it, right, not just for a second and then you stop, but like a significant part of it or all of it, you recite out loud, you have to make the 2 prostrations sajda as-sahw. Conversely, as-sir, if you recite the other 3 prayers, Fajr, Maghrib, and Isha, completely silent from the fara'id, right? Fajr, Maghrib, Isha. If you recite these silently, this is an omission, and therefore you have to make sahw. At-takbir, maybe except for the takbir of ihram, but some of the other takbirat, right? Like when you, let's say you're in jalsa, you're sitting, and then you're going to go back to sujood, Allahu Akbar. Let's say you forgot to say Allahu Akbar, you just go straight into sujood, Subhana Rabbil A'la. Then this is one you would make sahw for. At-tasmi'. This could either be Sami Allahu liman hamida, Rabbana wa lakal hamd, Sami Allahu liman hamida, to leave it off. Others have even commented that actually maybe not listening, like you just completely check out during the prayer. Then sajdatain wa at-tashahhudani, the both of at-tashahhud. Let's say you finished most of the prayer and now you're in jalsa, you're in the sitting position, and this is where at-tahiyyatu lillah, you start to make at-tashahhud. If you forget to do the first at-tashahhud, al-awwal aw al-akhir, or the last one, then as an act of forgetful omission, sajdatain as-sahw, right? Aw julus lit-tashahhud, or maybe you even forget altogether to go into jalsa. Then again, you have to make the two prostrations. فإذا سهى عن ركن, right, لم تجزئه صلاته حتى يأتي. إذا سهى عن فضيلة من الفضائل. I'm sorry, I think I repeated my slide here. So وإذا كان السهو عن سنة أو أكبر. However, if the oversight or the omission, the forgetfulness, is related to leaving a sunnah or anything greater, like an obligatory act, كترك قراءة السورة بعد الفاتحة, like as we said, what, you forget to recite something after Surah al-Fatiha, أو ترك التشهد, or you forgot, you left out to do at-tashahhud, jabru an-naqsa, then this deficiency is compensated bi sajdatain. This is done then by performing the two sajdas, and here's the important, yasjuduhuma ba'da at-tashahhudi al-akhir wa qabla as-salam. So you do it after at-tashahhud. So let's say again, okay, you're in your second raka'ah of al-Isha, and you forgot to recite some Quran after Surah al-Fatiha, and you realize, oh man, I did it. Okay, so at the very end of your prayer, you do at-tashahhud al-awwal, at-tahiyyatu lillah, and then you get Allahumma salli wa sallam. Okay, so now you get to the second at-tashahhud. When you get fil alamina innaka hamidun majid, now you're at the very end of your prayer, where normally you would make the salam. Before you make the salam, you make sajdatain. You make the two prostrations, right? Allahu Akbar, you make sajda, come back up. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, make sajda, Allahu Akbar, and then you make the salam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Right? So, جبر النقص بسجدتين يسجدهما بعد التشهد الأخير وقبل السلام. وهذا السجود في حكم السنة. And this is done in accordance as a rule according to the sunnah. لأنه عرض عنها. And they serve as a kind of compensation, right, for what was done. والدليل بالحديث الذي رواه مالك في الموطأ. And so the proof for this is according to a statement of the Prophet ﷺ that is transmitted and collected in the book known as al-Muwatta of Imam Malik, in which the Prophet ﷺ, أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال, he said, إني لا أنسى, sometimes I forget, أو أنسى, and sometimes I am made to forget, li as-sunnah, so that I can actually establish what to do in that case according to my sunnah. So he's saying that sometimes, because he's ana bashar mithlukum, the Prophet said, "What? I'm a man like the rest of you." Sometimes we forget, or can become forgetful, or you can become distracted. He says sometimes he said what? He said, "Inni la ansa aw unassa." Or even sometimes I forget, sometimes even made to forget, li a sunnah, to establish, right, a sunnah. And so that is the proof for how we handle that. إذا طربت أقوال الشيوخ في حكاية المذهب في حكم سجود السهو. So he said, al-Majjājī hafidhahullah, he said the opinions of the scholars regarding the rulings of the prostration for sahw, They have varied, and you will find, and here he's not only just saying the shuyukh of the madhab of Medina, of the so-called Maliki madhab, but of course, amongst the other madhab, there's some variation. And that's why some of you may have encountered, oh, well, I saw, some people say this, or some people, there is some variance in how to do it. And so he says that, فحكى بعضهم أنه سنة جملة من غير تفصيل. And so some have mentioned that it is a recommended act in general without specifying how. And then وحكى بعضهم أنه واجب جملة, while others have said that no, it's considered mandatory in general, right? Others have considered mandatory in general. And he says وفصل آخرون فعد البعد سنة والقبلي واجبا. And so some others, the other remainder from those, consider prostration for omission as recommended, whereas prostration for addition is obligatory, wajib. And so he's just saying you're going to find some differences of opinion on how to perform the two sajda for when you either omit due to forgetfulness or add due to forgetfulness. So now for the addition, so he says, وَإِذَا كَانَ السَّهْوُ بِزِيَادَةِ شَيْءٍ مِمَّا يَكُونُ عَمْدُهُ مُبْطَلًا لَهَا. So he said that if the mistake involves adding something that renders the prayer invalid when done intentionally, he said, كَزِيَادَةِ رَكَعَةٍ أَوْ سَجْدَةٍ, like adding an extra raka'ah, a unit of prayer, or an extra sajda. فَلْيَسْجُدْ بَعْدَ السَّلَامِ. And then that sahu is done after the salam. Right? So you would, when you add, then you would say, you get to the end of your prayer, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, sajdat al-sahw, Allahu Akbar, and then, sajdatain. So he says that, فَلْيَسْجُدْ بَعْدَ السَّلَامِ على صفة السجود القبلي. So that's done in accordance to the description of doing the sajda that is from before. وهذا السجود في حكم السنة أيضا. And then likewise, this is considered a recommended act of the prayer, right? لأنه خارج عن الصلاة, because it's something that happens outside of the prayer. كالسجود التلاوة, like when you're reading Quran. Like if you're reading Quran outside of prayer and you get to one of the ayah that has sajda, and you do it like you're making sajda, but you're doing it outside of the prayer. Right? So he says, كالسجود التلاوة ولأنه ترقيب للشيطان, because it serves as a way to protect and encourage a person against the influence of the shayateen, of shaitan. وإذا اجتمع نقص مع زيادة غلب حكم النقص والسجد قبل الصلاة. Now what happens if in your prayer you have an omission and an addition? Right? If you have both an omission, you forgot to recite you're praying Isha, and in the second raka'ah you forgot to recite al-Fatiha, and then somehow in the third raka'ah you made an extra sajda, right? So you have both an omission and an addition. He says in this case, then the omission will prevail. So إذا اجتمع نقص مع زيادة غلب حكم النقص, then you handle the situation according to the rules of omission. So if you have both omission and addition, then you will make up the deficiency in such a prayer by just following the rules pertaining to omission. غلب حكم النقص والسجر قبل السلام. So again, when you have omission, the salam is done. When you have omission, then the salam, the sahw is done before the salam. When you have addition, بعد السلام. ومن شك في صلاته. Now, what happens when a person is uncertain about how many raka'ah that they prayed? He says, فَلَمْ يَدْرِ كَمْ صَلَّى. You don't know how many you prayed. ثَلَاثًا أَوْ أَرْبَعًا مثلا. So like if you, let's say, oh man, did I pray, you were praying Dhuhr, or you're praying Isha. Did I do 3 or 4? What do you do? فَإِنَّهُ يَبْنِي عَلَيْهِ الْيَقِينَ. Then you will act in accordance for what you know you did. Well, I definitely know that I think it was 3 or 4. I definitely know that it was 3. Could have been 4, but I do know that it was 3. So then you act in accordance of what is known, which would be 3, and then you would have to do the 4th one. You would do the 4th raka'ah in this case, right? And so if ينبي عليه اليقين وهو الأقل. And so when trying to determine, well, what is al-yaqeen? What is certain is always going to be the lesser number. So for how do you determine when, did I pray 3 or 4? Or maghrib, did I pray 2 or 3? How many? Go with the lesser number. وهو الأقل ويسجد بعد السلام. In that case, the 2 prostrations for sahw then are done what? After the salam. So assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. So you may, if you I did I think it was 3 or 4. You did 3. You can then add it, and then what? Ba'ad as-salam. You do that. Any questions or comments on that? Okay, looks like we got a couple here from Dawood. Let me open up. Okay, so 2 questions. Number 1, what if you realize you made a mistake and meant to make the 2 sajda before salam, but forgot to do them? Can you make them after you already made the salam, or what happens in that case? Do you need to repeat the whole prayer? So there are 2 ways that you can handle this. There is an opinion that after the prayer, if it's like, let's say you, like it's just as you said, you prayed whatever, Asr Maghrib, and I had this deficiency, or I added something, and I knew I did, but somehow I still that I had another act of, another act of forgetfulness, which is to actually make the sahw after the prayer. There is one opinion that essentially, because you didn't make it up, that's what would have made the prayer complete. That would have made the makeup, right? Jabr al-naqas. Then you just have to repeat the prayer. Another is, if you're still there, let's say you did just that. You prayed, I forgot this, I added this, right? Oh, I got to do that at the end, but I still finished because I'm on autopilot. I still finished my prayer, and I did the salam, I'm done, and I'm about to get up. Oh, I didn't do sajda. You do your sajda, but again, the question would be, what? When we said, when it is naqas, when it is omission, it has to be done what? Qabla salam. So it also depends on what you did. If you omitted something from your prayer, the only way to make it valid is that you would then do it before the salam. So if you finished your prayer and you get up and the salam is done, then you should repeat the prayer. If you're dealing with something that was ziyada, you added something to the prayer, raka'ah, qira'ah, sajda, whatever, you added something to the prayer, and that the way to correct this is to do the sahw after the salam. If you're still generally there, oh, I didn't, then you could make your sajdatain, you can make your 2 sajda of sahw. So again, depending on whether it is omission or addition, naqas or ziyada. In the case of naqas, if you finish the prayer and you've kind of left from the place, then you repeat the prayer. Number 2, can you recite a vocal qunut in a silent prayer? Dhuhr and Asr. A vocal qunut? No, because the prayer is silent. So you should not do a vocal qunut in a. So if the salah is jahar, if it's an out loud salah, then and then likewise, if the Fajr, Maghrib, Isha recited out loud, you should not do the qunut silent. And then Dhuhr, Asr, they're sir, they're silent. If you do it, then you should not do it out loud. Any other questions? I think those were the main 2 that we had. So that will. So I went ahead a little bit to that, just because I know some of you were asking, and I think it was just good because I know that's probably one of the things many of us struggle with is, oh man, I left something out, I added, what do I do? So alhamdulillah, you can go back and review this if you need to for keeping your prayer, inshallah, valid. So we're going to take, again, maybe just like a 2 or 3 minute break. I'm just going to grab some water, and then we will be right back with our reading from Sahih Muslim, inshallah. وصلوات الله تعالى على نبيه الكريم وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. الحمد لله رب العالمين وإياكم. السلام عليكم.